Live from Smark Movement Studios, it's episode number 292 of the Smack Talk podcast. Obviously, we're not live. I'm just kind of changing things up a little bit here. I'm sick and tired of saying, "What's up, wrestling fans?" at the beginning of this. But what is up, wrestling fans? I am your host, Tony Mango, and this is the Hot Tags edition of the week, where I'll be breaking down some current events, rumors, news, gossip, and other kinds of bullshit that went down in the world of professional wrestling over the past couple of days. It is 11:54 p.m. on Monday night, the 3rd of July. So in 6 minutes, happy Independence Day, everybody. By the time I'm uploading this, it's going to be well into Tuesday, but that doesn't really matter. It's the thought that counts, right? So these are the things that have happened over the past couple of days. We haven't had too many things that are of too much importance, which in some ways is good, because a lot of the times it's some bad news. Like, I'm going to just brush past right now the idea of Sonny being in another, whole hospital situation and stuff. Happens all the time. Nothing really to talk about like that. Not a whole lot of super crazy stories like that. But we do have a couple negative things that we do need to talk about. Eric Young's mother passed away recently. That's why he missed his tapings. That sucks. Condolences go out to his family, as well as to the Hart family. Smith Hart passed away at the age of 68. So that sucks to hear that kind of stuff. But usually not too much as far as debating the topics or really discussing all that stuff, but it's good to get that out of the way and start talking about the more positive or speculative or just, it sounds kind of insensitive, but the more interesting stories that have actually gone down. And knowing that I'm doing this ahead of time, I'm kind of assuming over the next couple of days we're going to get some sort of big stories that'll be sort of like, damn it, why wasn't that a part of the hot tags? But you do what you got to do. I take care of these Monday nights, and that's why we get some overlap. So let's continue talking about NXT for a little bit. Why not? Gunner, apparently, from TNA, is now a part of the roster. He made his debut at an NXT live event recently. So for those people that thought that Gunner had more to offer and wished that he would be in WWE, looks like you're getting your wish. He is not somebody who looks to be getting that same type of push as far as Hideo Itami, Finn Balor, Samoa Joe, even Drew McIntyre with his return, Cassius Ohno. A lot of these people they come in and they're brought up as this big deal. And Bobby Fish, I think was his name, recently just made his debut, and they didn't really make too much of a splash about him, but I don't think his episode has actually aired yet, now that I'm thinking about it. I don't know. I'm a little bit behind on NXT. I did the spoilers a couple weeks ago, and I'm sort of losing track of which things have aired and which things haven't and stuff, but Gunner being a part of the NXT roster is a positive for him, and if that's going to be going anywhere in the future, then no better time than the present, right? So I was never the biggest fan of Gunner, but at the same time, it's because I never really saw too much about Gunner. It was TNA, and my philosophies when it comes to TNA. Never really checked out all that much about them, so I do remember thinking that Gunner had at least a little bit to offer. It wasn't like somebody who I hated him or anything like that, so I'm kind of interested to see where they take him in the future. Always willing to give somebody a shot at the very least, and they can prove me right, they can prove me wrong, they can be somewhat in the middle and not really make any kind of splash whatsoever. Either way, we're going to find out over the next couple of months, I guess. So pay attention to Gunner. Maybe something will happen out of that. That should bring us into a little bit of topic about TNA itself. There's one of the biggest stories that happened this week is the rebranding, where TNA, Impact Wrestling, Total Nonstop Action, NWA, whatever you want to call all the old stuff mixed in together, they are now Global Force Wrestling. Anthem and Jeff Jarrett and all the powers that be that are now in control of the company decided, you know what, that TNA brand name is just too irreparably damaged and they need to get rid of it. But because they still have their ties with Pop TV, they couldn't really change the Impact name, and maybe they didn't necessarily want to, because Impact isn't hurt as poorly as TNA is. And if you're kind of looking for sponsors and stuff, Impact Wrestling doesn't sound as bad as TNA. We've joked about this ad nauseum about the idea that it's stupid for anybody to think that you can get PG or G-rated sponsorships on a wrestling show that's labeled TNA because of the obvious innuendo. I don't know why they didn't think about that. You would have thought that would have been one of the joke names that they would have tossed out in the pitch meeting as like, why don't we go with like Total Nonstop Action, TNA, ha ha ha, tits and ass. And then they would have been like, all right, yeah, that's pretty funny. But seriously, what do we need to name our brand? And they decided to go with it. And they kept it for years and years and years. They ruined the brand name. And even Impact Wrestling, I think, to a certain extent, you can't really come back from that. But if they would have gone with Global Force Wrestling Amped, which was their version of the show that never really aired because they couldn't really, get that ball rolling and kind of become an actual extra wrestling show, I don't think that would have worked all too well either. Because if they change it to Amped, then anybody who's recording stuff on their DVR, they are not going to be recording Impact and stuff. They probably would change it anyway, and if you're paying attention, you'd probably not be all too crazy about it, but Amped is still sort of like this generic 90s kick sort of like Generation X, X Games, Amped, like that kind of thing. It's more of like a Monster Drink promotional tie-in video than it would be for like that you would think that it's like a combat sports thing. So they should have maybe gone with another name or something if they could have, but what we are seeing are some changes to try to change the brand around a little bit. And by going with Global Force Wrestling instead of TNA now, it's a step in the right direction. And we saw, some of us saw a little bit of Slammiversary. I can't give a review of the event because I watched about 2.5 segments of it, and I couldn't do it. I know that, like, a lot of people every once in a while say, "Oh, you should give them a chance. Like, they do some good stuff. You should be checking out the Broken Matt Hardy character, or you should be checking out the X Division, what they got going on and stuff." Guys, come on, man. I mean, I turned it on, and it was Scott Steiner and Josh Mathews against, what was it, Jeremy Borash and Joseph Park. They're still doing the Joseph Park thing. And in the middle of the match, they switch over into a pre-recorded backstage skit with, like, Scott Steiner gets hit in the face with, like, a fire extinguisher, and he's like, "Oh, it tastes like tapioca. It's cleaning my teeth." And God, it was awful. Terrible. Like, not even laugh at how cheesy it is, and it's fun. It was just, God, terrible. Terrible show that I was watching. So I couldn't really continue watching it. I saw the Sanjay Dutt and I was going to call him Kaval low-key match, which I was kind of confused about why low-key was just dressed up like that character from Hitman, but whatever. And that was okay. I mean, the match quality itself was, like, fine, but I didn't really give a shit about the story behind it. Maybe because I wasn't watching it, maybe because I just don't care about these people, but then I started to watch the women's match, and it was some girl named Rosemary against, I think the other one was Sienna. It was one of those two. I'm not too sure which one of them. But that just was blah, and I ended up shutting it off midway through that because I just couldn't take it anymore. So it doesn't seem like TNA is rebranding as far as their quality. And I don't know why they aren't changing the writers and why they aren't changing how they do different things like that, but that means that I'm not missing anything, so I can continue to not watch it. Whether it's TNA, or if it's Global Force Wrestling, or if they change it to some other random name. But at the very least, getting rid of the TNA name is a smart business decision, and it's still way too low down on the list of things that you would need to change to fix the company as far as rehauling everything, and you probably still are working with too many negatives to actually work the whole damn thing. But if that's one step in the right direction, it's at least something I can kind of pat them on the back with and just sort of say, hey, it took you 15 years, but you finally got rid of the TNA name. Nice. Maybe in another 15, they can be, I don't know, go from like a D- type of score to like a D+ or something like that. Maybe 100 years from now, they'll figure out a way to have a decent program. I don't think that this is going to be something that's really going to be a game changer as far as making it competitive to WWE. And when your world champion is Alberto Del Rio, then you know even more that I'm not going to be into it. And speaking about that, this isn't even listed on the hot tags right now, but I'm going to mention it anyway. People are all talking about, like, Paige was showing up on the ringside seats for that Del Rio match. She was wearing a mask, and she was clearly there specifically because she's checking out what her husband's doing. Or actually, are they married together? They're just engaged, I think, right? Yeah, her fiance then. People were kind of going crazy about this, saying, like, well, that was disrespectful, and she shouldn't have done that. And I can kind of agree to a certain extent, because I think that that's sort of, it's bending the rules a little bit. Like, she's not actually appearing for another company, but she sort of is. And I think that they sort of did the best that they could do, while also not doing the best that they can do. Kind of like, if you really want to nitpick, you can say, well, if she was backstage, she should have stayed backstage, and she didn't need to be ringside for it. And that's true. That's very true. She did not need to be ringside for it. But if she was going to be ringside, it's at least good that they put the mask on her. Now, they didn't need to necessarily have a little placard that said, this is Saraya Beavis, and they kind of forecast to everybody who the hell it actually was. But that's Paige for you. She's been trying to do everything she can to get fired, it seems. And Del Rio is still talking about how lawyers need to look into if WWE leaked the sex tape stuff and whatever. These two are so just, they're poison. And it's a shame to see that they're in that kind of a position. I don't want to say that their careers are so awful because, hey, they're making more money than I am and stuff. But at the same time, Paige is just, they need to fire her. And they need to fire her in a sense where, like, she doesn't get any kind of satisfaction of being like, yeah, I got out of it. They need to fire her for, like, to make her look bad, I think. And I support WWE if they were to do that kind of thing, because she is kind of pushing the buttons when it comes to that. Let's move on to something non-TNA related. Right now, that's way too much TNA talk for this. WWE has filed a trademark for the XFL again, oddly enough. And it's supposed to be for entertainment in, like, a wrestling capacity in some sort of fashion, which doesn't really speak to how they could use it for that, because Extreme Football League is not a wrestling thing. And it's not like you're going to bring in people from the XFL that are now going to work as professional wrestlers, because they're all, at this point, probably retired and stuff. And I'm really curious what happens with this. The only thing I can think of is maybe they have the rights to use the XFL footage and they're going to add it to the WWE network, because that could be something where maybe they need to, like, rebuy the trademark for it, or something like that. But I think that people are going to take this the wrong direction. I think that they're going to try to start writing up articles about how the XFL is going to return and stuff, and I don't think that that's going to happen. So don't get your hopes up if you are interested in an XFL return. But whatever they are going to do this with, still something interesting to take note of. XFL is getting a recent trademark reapplication. So WWE doesn't think that they should get rid of it in whatever capacity that is. Pretty interesting. Let's talk about SummerSlam. There are rumors going around now that AJ Styles versus Shinsuke Nakamura is going to happen at SummerSlam and not at WrestleMania. I'm going to call bullshit on this. I don't think that this is happening. I think that this is scoop, 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 scuttlebutt, which we've talked about before, where some wrestling websites, which I'm not saying that Smark Moment is devoid of this kind of mentality, but I try not to do it, where they see something happen on WWE television and then they decide to make a fake rumor that sort of starts to circulate. I think that that's the case here. Now, of course, I don't know for sure one way or the other, but there are rumors on the dirt sheets that they're going to do Styles versus Nakamura not at WrestleMania, but at SummerSlam. And I think the entire reasoning behind this is because we had that little bit of the tease during the Money in the Bank match, and they're starting to go, oh man, that means that they're going to be pushing it sooner than later, and WWE wants to make SummerSlam better and bigger, and that would be the best thing for them to do and stuff. Yes, it's a possibility, but doesn't that sort of kill off one of your potential things that you can build towards? Because right now, AJ Styles is a babyface. He is almost inarguably the top babyface on the WrestleMania brand, on the SmackDown brand. Shinsuke Nakamura is another babyface. He's sure as hell not turning heel anytime soon. And I don't think that AJ Styles is either. So if AJ Styles tomorrow night, or well, technically tonight now that it's 12:08, happy Independence Day again, if he wins that United States Championship match tonight on SmackDown, then I think that he's going to win that United States title. But I wouldn't go with Shinsuke Nakamura being the next challenger for him. I think that that's further down the line. I think Styles keeps it until WrestleMania, where he loses it to Nakamura there. As far as SummerSlam goes, I don't know. I mean, he could end up fighting another match against Kevin Owens, or he could have a match against, I don't know, Baron Corbin. He could have a match against Mike Kanellis or Dolph Ziggler. There's a variety of some different options here. But I do think that maybe Rusev gets that title shot. I don't know. I don't think we're getting Styles Nakamura at SummerSlam. If it does happen, then we'll know that these reports turned out to be true. But I think that what we're getting is something different. I think Shinsuke Nakamura is going to be doing his feud with Corbin for at least a little bit here. And I wouldn't put too much emphasis on these rumors. So keep that in mind, though. It's a possibility. We have seen that the rumor match for WrestleMania with Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar is most likely going to happen at SummerSlam. So maybe their ideas have changed entirely. And maybe instead of doing these handful of matches, we're going to get something completely different from that. Which, if that does happen, it's going to be really interesting to see what we get for WrestleMania. Because at that point, does AJ Styles win the championship and head into WrestleMania with something? Does Shinsuke Nakamura hold the United States title and defend it against, God, I don't even know. There's a wide range of different options for a lot of different things. So pay attention. You never know what might happen. And as far as tonight on SmackDown, that might be an indication of where they go for the future too. One thing that's very, very interesting as far as how they can kind of manipulate different shows in the future is now we're seeing some things happening where the brand split doesn't necessarily apply to live events. We know that John Cena is labeled as a free agent, and tonight on SmackDown we should get a little bit of a clarification of what that means. But now they're advertising Brock Lesnar against Baron Corbin, Seth Rollins to pop up on a SmackDown live event, possibility of people popping over to Monday Night Raw if they needed them. Does this mean that the brand split is a failure? I wouldn't go so far as to say that, but I'm not going to be too unwilling to say I told you so when it came to the idea of they probably shouldn't do a brand split, because now they're doing the superstar shakeup, they're switching things up with different people, they're ruining people. John Cena's suddenly a free agent. Now it's like, well, let's get the house show market back into a different swing of things. And I think that this is a telltale sign that they didn't think things through as much. And that's kind of cool for people on the house shows because you never know exactly who you're going to get. But at the same time, if they are worried that much about the house shows and they need to bring other people in here and there, then that's not a good sign for the roster. And you know what? If you have that few people that you can depend on to actually be stars and you need to bring other people from other shows onto there, you need to either get rid of the brand split or you need to move some people up from NXT and you need to make some new stars. That's just how it goes. It's kind of like if you're working a warehouse and you've got 5 people working, none of them are strong enough to lift the equipment, and you have no cranes, you got to either buy some cranes, hire some more people, or figure out another way to do your business. Just how it works. And WWE, if they are not getting the people on the house shows, they need to figure out a way to fix that. Brand split or no brand split, I think that'll be a good indicator of how much they really put value in these individual superstars. And if it's only SmackDown that's hurting, where they need Brock Lesnar and they need Seth Rollins, then SmackDown needs to get to be more of a priority. And that's just how it goes. Either way, I think it's kind of funny. Speaking of Baron Corbin, though, he just bought Big Show's house, who apparently had bought it originally from The Undertaker. And this is the type of story that I added into the notes when it was the very first story of the week. And I was thinking to myself, oh man, I hope that this isn't like the biggest story that happens for the week, because it really is not all that important. But WWE, for some reason, felt like this was important. They actually ran a story about this, and it was like, guess who just bought a house from the Big Show and whatever. It's an oddball story, and once in a while, oddball stories are good to throw into the hot tags. But the whole idea of the house being big enough for a big guy, like Undertaker and Big Show and stuff, Baron Corbin must have been like, hey, I'm a big guy, why not? And just an odd, strange type of story. Nothing really too big about it. Let's talk about the Wilkes-Barre Way episode of Ride Along, which featured Sheamus and Cesaro in one car, and in another car it was Big Show and Kurt Angle. Pretty good episode. I usually like to give you my see it or skip it kind of review. I say see it. Both different cars were kind of filled with some interesting things. Sheamus and Cesaro actually have more chemistry than I've seen them do in anything when they're on the road. And Cesaro, surprisingly, a lot of energy for that guy for being just sort of like, I don't know, it seemed like he was almost like fanboying a little bit. But I don't want to ruin anything as far as like some jokes that happen or some interesting things that they talk about or whatever like that. But I say go ahead and check it out if you got the time. And if obviously Ride Along is not your favorite thing, skipping it's not going to be the biggest deal in the world either. You're not going to be like missing out on a big storyline or something like that. It's just something extra to put in the background for 20 minutes or so. I think that you should check it out if you're interested. The biggest story, as far as I'm concerned for this week, though, that's what we got to get into now, which is that the Colognes are essentially going to be leaving WWE. But it's an odd circumstance because this all came about by way of World Wrestling Council in Puerto Rico, which is owned by Carlos Colon. And Super Luchas, I think, was the other part that kind of broke this story. Basically, it boils down to Epico started posting merchandise on Pro Wrestling Tees under the name Orlando Colon. We haven't seen them really doing anything with this push since they switched over to the Colognes, so it makes sense that they would have been requesting their release at least a little bit, and I kind of buy into this being a thing that's going to happen soon. They did work some house show stuff, although Primo apparently wasn't in part of that. So it looks like WWE isn't willing to really grant them their release yet. And maybe they're trying to work it out. Maybe they're trying to say, like, hey, if you stick around, we'll give you a title shot, or we'll give you a push in the future, or something like that. But the way that they've been doing this whole odd kind of switch from American Alpha to sort of the Fashion Police, but kind of not, it's starting to make sense now that maybe the reason why they can't get a solid feud is because they don't actually want to give them a solid feud. Maybe there is contract disputes. Maybe they did request a release weeks ago, and this is sort of like a bargaining chip. It's like, hey, well, we can try to go work in WWC, and we can make a career outside of WWE. Because really, if you look at it at this point, Primo and Carlito were much more successful than Primo and Epico. Primo and Epico as a duo did win the tag team titles, but nobody gave a shit. And then they ended up becoming Los Matadores, and they were awful. Then they became the Shining Stars, and they were awful. Now they're the Colognes, and nobody cares. So I don't put it past them to really kind of just want to quit. I would have rather had seen them stick around if that's the case, only if they could have gotten Carlito to join, but it doesn't seem like that's going to be happening. So now, at this point, if you can't get Carlito and make that a 3-person stable to feud with the New Day, good riddance, you know? They're not going to amount to anything else. They're never going to be anything but tag teams, and I never really liked Epico to begin with, so I'm not going to be shedding a tear if they go. And if you are, let me know. And let me know what you think about any of the other stories that we were talking about here in the hot tags, or if anything else happens throughout the week, drop them in the comments below, and I'll try to give my opinions about that stuff. But that's going to be it for this week's edition of the hot tags, so thank you all for listening. Make sure you stay tuned for our main event this week, which is going to be the Great Balls of Fire predictions, which I may be recording tomorrow afternoon, or tonight afternoon at this point. Maybe Wednesday, I'm not too sure. And I also wasn't positive if I'm going to do an IWC outreach this week. I may be canceling that in the future and not doing any more videos like that. I'm kind of on the fence about it, so your opinions will kind of make a decision about that at least a little bit. So leave your comments below about that as well. But hit that subscribe button. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Pay attention to the website as well for anything else that's happening there. And we will see you when we see you next. This has been another Smark Out moment, and I'm being counted out.